Climate Youth News at COP. We bring you news from the 27th World Climate Change Conference in Egypt and provide you with the most important information of the day, the latest developments and voices from the field. We start with a first contribution on the topic of the day.
First of all, the UN has different agencies that tackle different issues to make the world a better place. And the body of the UN that tackles the climate change and intergovernmental negotiations on climate change is called the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. And that is the body that is responsible for organizing the conferences of parties and the intersessionals that happen in June, and then the conferences of parties where all the decision makers all around the world come together and decide on climate policies together, happen during the end of the year every year. With that being said, I will let you know what a COP is in a nutshell, real quick. So a COP, there are several agenda items discussed in a COP. There are civil society engagement during COP as well. There are a lot of pavilions that you can visit and learn more about other stuff that you're interested in, or for example, wider sustainable development as well. There are both civil society pavilions, country pavilions, and great initiative pavilions as well. And there are a lot of side events happening. You can also organize side event whenever the side event application is out, for example. And as young people, we engage through different constituencies in this process and participate through different negotiations and raise our voices to make sure that our voices and the voices of the children and future generations are at the core of these decision-making tables when the decisions are being made on the climate crisis and the climate policies are being made, for example. And there are several agenda items under the UNFCCC that you can follow, which is action for climate empowerment, loss and damage, climate finance. I personally follow Global Stock Day because it's really relevant to the national contributions, and we really need young people to be at the core of the national development contributions and its implementation, because young people are fighting at the forefront in their countries and they need to be having a better future to deserve that. So that being said, I think that this is all about COP and the UNFCCC in a nutshell. You can all join a conference of party under the UNFCCC through any accredited organization or your university as well. Ask around in your universities. Sometimes they are also accredited and registered organizations. And yeah, I think that this is about it.
After this brief overview, we can now dive deeper into the COP. The following article is on what happened today.
COP27 has officially started. For the next 2 weeks, world leaders, scientists, activists and other stakeholders gather in Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt, to make progress on the fight against the climate crisis. During the opening plenary, UN Secretary Guterres has reminded us of what is at stake. We are in the fight for our lives and we are losing it, facing the choice between cooperation or collective suicide. UNFCCC Secretary Steele warned against backsliding from the Glasgow commitments, particularly on phasing down coal and ending fossil fuel subsidies. This sentiment was echoed by many parties. Today marked the second day of the World Leaders Summit. In that context, Tuvalu became the second nation to call for a fossil fuel non-proliferation treaty by joining forces with fellow Pacific nation Vanuatu in calling for states to negotiate an international mechanism that would manage a fast and fair global transition away from coal, oil and gas. Meanwhile, the United Arab Emirates president, who will host next year's COP, confirms their plans to continue selling oil and gas as the world is in need of it. The Prime Minister of Barbados, Mia Mottley, delivered a statement on colonial consequences of the Industrial Revolution. We were the ones whose blood, sweat and tears financed the Industrial Revolution, she said. She also proposed a 10% tax on the profits of oil and gas producers that could raise around $37 billion for climate finance. Relating to adaptation, UN Secretary Guterres unveiled an action plan to achieve early warning for all over the next 5 years. The initiative targets $3.1 billion in adaptation investments, However, this is only a tiny fraction of the promised $40 billion in adaptation funding by 2025 agreed upon at COP26. Loss and damage on the agenda. What vulnerable countries, most affected communities, and global civil society have tirelessly pushed for is now decided. For the first time, the official agenda of COP27 includes an item 8F on matters relating to a funding arrangement responding to loss and damages, the devastating consequences of climate-induced weather events. However, experts highlight that it is just a bare minimum that needs to be followed by concrete action. The fact that agreement over the new item was only reached after 40 hours of informal consultation shows how controversial the negotiations are. In this vein, Germany pledged 170 million euros to the Global Shield against climate risk, which aims at strengthening insurance and disaster protection finance. It will be cooperatively launched by the rich G7 countries and the V20 group, a group of climate-vulnerable states. The amount is very small compared to what is needed, but symbolically significant. Observer NGOs highlighted that the loss and damage finance needs to be grant-based and accessible. An insurance-based setup is only a part of the solution because it is not affordable to all and does not cover non-economic losses. Pakistan became the most recent example of why many countries are fighting for a loss and damage finance facility. It is responsible for less than 1% of the world's emissions, but is paying a heavy price. The Pakistani envoy, Nabil Munir, said, "Loss and damage is not charity, it's climate justice." A simple message that seems to be increasingly heard across the globe.
You see, that's really something else when you hear something like this directly from the ground. We want to continue with this and pass the microphone on to activists on the ground.
How is your city affected by climate change? Can I introduce myself a bit? Okay, so hi, my name is Fatma. I'm from Karachi, Pakistan. As a lot of people know, Pakistan is one of the countries that face a lot of climate emergency side effects this year with the floods. Roughly 33 million people were affected and $20 billion have been lost in the damages so far. I'm from Karachi. Karachi is an immigrant city. It was a fishing village turned city after partition in 1947. It's an immigrant city because all these communities from all over the subcontinent and Asia moved to Karachi post-partition, and it kind of became a home place for those people. And I've been raised in Karachi. I've lived in Karachi my whole life. I don't know a place without it. And Karachi is one of the cities that has been noted by the World Bank to be one of the hotspots for the climate emergency. And with it, after Cape Town, we are the next city to run out of water. And we already have existing issues in adaptation and mitigation when it comes to how our cities manage. So if I'm just talking about myself, if it rains for 15 minutes, the entire city is underwater. Cars do not run, schools get shut down. Food gets worse because they don't have the conditions to curb it, and food poverty and economic issues get even worse. Pakistan's also going through an economic crisis at the same time because of the climate emergency, and that directly goes and hits the economic hub of Pakistan, which is Karachi. Karachi has the level of industrialization that is present in Karachi is not present in other parts of the country, and that's why. And it's a 20 million person population city, and that's why there's a lot of lack of management on how to adapt and mitigate the climate loss. So it could be rising temperatures, it could be months of rainfall, it could be all of these effects that go directly and hit different parts of society. I, as a young person, schools get shut down. Laborers are affected by direct rising temperatures, and that creates an economic crisis in regards with inflation. I think also coming to what I'm doing here at COP is that I'm really here to represent cities and urban losses that continuously are affected by the climate emergency. And Pakistan is a country that is not in the top 99% of countries in the world that emit carbon emissions. We are in the bottom 1%, but we are the top 10 most affected countries by climate change. And the situation we've seen this year, I have been preaching it and talking about it for years. And we finally saw what it looks like, 20 billion US dollars lost. And that's why I think it's really important for me to represent my city, because a lot of times in the climate narrative, urban communities and urban losses are filtered out because they just get covered up with some cement and they're done with. And that's why I think it's very important for the global community to know that Karachi is like a country. It has as many people as most EU countries have, and that's why it's very important to know that it's just not a statistic, it's a place. There are people here, there are children here, and it's up to the global community to come together and help countries like Pakistan face those challenges. So yeah.
Thank you for this powerful and important perspective. We, as the Global North, bear the main responsibility for the climate crisis and should finally live up to it. That was our today's broadcast from the 27th World Climate Change Conference in Egypt. We hope you will take something away with you. Tune in again tomorrow when it's Climate Youth News at COP. We will now follow up with a live Q&A with our team on the ground, so stay tuned and ask your question.
Hi, thanks for joining the Q&A session, Fatima. Can you briefly introduce yourself again?
Okay, so hi, I'm from FFF Pakistan and FFF MAPA. I'm from, obviously, Pakistan. I'm a climate rights advocate and a youth spokesperson, and I'm here at COP representing my city. I'm from Karachi, and yeah.
So in the video, you talked a lot about your city. Can you also explain what are your core demands for the leaders at COP27?
Yeah. So one of the key demands that a lot of youth across the board from both the global north and global south have made is that understanding the linkage between adaptation and loss and damages, because a lot of times they get confused into the same thing. And it's very important for us to create the narrative that loss and damages only happen when adaptation fails. So you need to understand both these things, and they can't be put into the same funding mechanism. So when world leaders sit together and world diplomats sit together and actually decide on legislative systems, they need to prioritize both adaptation and loss and damage, curbing, and finances around it. And that's kind of the narrative present here today, because every community around the world has somewhat faced a level of climate change. It's just that a lot of the global south gets stuck with the damages and actually the countries that don't emit enough. Like I said this, I don't know if I said this in the video as well, but I did always like to highlight that Pakistan is in the top 10 most vulnerable countries to climate change and is the bottom 1% in global carbon emissions. So how should civilians be told to manage their emissions in Pakistan when it's a lot of the international community's lack of action? So that's a lot of what we want to do about the climate crisis. So yeah.
Can you tell us something about the difficulties attending COP?
So with the difficulties attending COP, because I feel like we had a very different accreditation service this year, it was very difficult to obviously get a badge. You had to go through multiple rounds, and it honestly took a lot of mental stress. And that was one of the biggest challenges with COP, because a lot of people didn't get to be here. And I feel like that's why I constantly try to highlight that, yeah, I'm from one of the biggest cities on earth, but I think I'm the only youth representative from Karachi. And that should say something, because it doesn't correlate right in those statistics. And besides that, it was just not easy to get here. It was expensive. There wasn't a lot of options for youth, or opportunities for youth, or passages, or streamline. And it's very important to have youth in the dialogue when this is our future being discussed. Yeah.
So you said it is very important to be at the dialogues. Can you explain what are your tasks? What do you do at COP?
So my tasks in COP, especially because I work for an international NGO, a lot of our understanding is that we want to have a very clear understanding of what's occurring at the negotiation tables and take opportunity in bridging the gap between the global north and global south, especially since a lot of the people from the global south don't get the opportunity to be in the same room as the global north. So taking that opportunity and taking that fact, especially since COP this year is in the African continent and it is very close to other global south communities in Asia, we want to push that narrative and representation. So it can be press like this, it can be interactive panels, it can be art installations, it can just be speaking to a single individual. And then that's one aspect of it. Another aspect of it is because I really like to understand the academic research and the policies being put in place that will essentially curb the climate crisis. A lot of us have observer status, so we're allowed to go to negotiation spaces and see what's being made about our futures and the decisions that impact our lives. Yeah.
And what would be a good outcome at COP27?
I think a good outcome would be to have proper adaptation funds and transparency in those funds if they're being managed in the global south, because a lot of times with changing governance and political instability, there's a lack of transparency on an international forum. So I think that's very important from a grassroots level to an international level. That's one. Two, it would be involving youth in formal dialogue, because a lot of times there's a stereotype, you don't know what they're talking about. But I think a lot of us here today are very clear representations that we want to be a part of the conversation, but we're not being allowed to. And criticism isn't, and thirdly, criticism shouldn't be taken badly. A lot of times, a lot of activists risk their lives by being critical of a policy or an amendment or a certain institution. But there needs to be an understanding in civil society that we have to work together, and criticism is positive too. I think. Someone asked, do you have the feeling that this time the conference will make a big step further? I think it will, because I think the type of losses we've seen in Pakistan this year are like disgustingly high. It's $20 billion lost. It's 33 million lives affected, which is more than most EU countries have. And because Pakistan is the chair of the G77 this year and the co-chair of the conference, we really want to be a part of the dialogue in actually reaching some sort of solution to the climate emergency, because essentially you can't slow climate change down, you can manage how it affects people better. There are so many institutions and private companies that are creating schemes for adaptation and loss and damage and mitigation in urban and rural atmospheres. And I think that's what needs to be prioritized. It's only 3 days in. I can see that the stakes are high, and I will be realistic, but I really hope there is a positive outcome because we don't have any other options.
Now there are a lot of questions at YouTube. How do you evaluate the decision to put loss and damage funding at the COP27 agenda?
Sorry, can you repeat that once more?
Yes. How do you evaluate the decision to put loss and damage financing on the agenda of COP27?
I think because loss and damage has been included in the agenda, a lot of the public conversations in the blue zone and at pavilions is that people want climate finance and they want transparency about climate finance and they want to know where the money is going. And it's also important that a lot of the global north countries that have higher emissions than most of the global south put together need to step up, take responsibility, meet the pledges they already have, and also provide debt relief to countries that are not a part of the problem. We are just the ones who are consistently we get the other edge of the stick. And I think that's why it was very important for me to come here and be a part of that dialogue, because no representation is no solution.
How is the response to your activities at all countries?
So a lot of I feel like I should specify a lot in what my activities are. Because I work for an international NGO and I did a lot of stuff with academic institutes, it was more about creating a space where a lot of youth had an understanding of what was going on. So it's climate awareness schemes, it's bringing women to the table, it's about creating a small adaptation and mitigation efforts and contributing back to the community and raising that cultural awareness. So like, it could be like, I wrote a white paper before last year's COP, which was presented in the Pakistan National Assembly with other signatories and other climate policies and climate professionals. And so that's a really big step because it's bringing youth into the dialogue. And I think those are the type of activities that I try to focus on in Pakistan. So it's not only legislative, it is school communities, it is working on international campaigns. Like last year, I worked in the FFF Standard Chartered campaign, which was to decarbonize banks that are investing in fossil fuel industries in the global south. So these are all like just a few project examples of what I try to do. And I feel like I really do focus my advocacy on being a representative of Pakistan internationally in my own community in my city. So because there's a lack of accountability in the global north and there's a lack of understanding of what the global north is doing in the global south. So, yeah.
Does the governance appreciate your climate activities, or does the society appreciate?
I think because I work with society primarily. I don't do government projects a lot. I think there's been a huge shift in youth society in Pakistan, and especially civil society, because a lot of people, the more I show a certain understanding and perspective and I build on the perspective, people take things seriously also. And yes, there are a lot of people who also don't, but I can see that the narrative is shifting, and the fact that I am here means that when I go back home, I can say something with prominence and people will take me seriously. So that counts for something.
People were asking if it was hard to get to Egypt.
I mean, yes, but I think it was harder for other people because it's not that far from me. So I definitely don't think I am like a fair representation of how hard it was, because other people traveled for 4 days. I had a much easier journey than other people if we're talking about the physical journey. And yeah, because it was closer, it was less economically like of a consequence to me. It just wasn't as hard as it was for me. as it is for other people. So yes, it was hard, but other people have it worse.
Thanks. What can activists in the world do to support Pakistan, especially in the global north?
I think because I'm a part of a network like Fridays for Future, which is a very known network in Europe, I think it's very important for the Fridays for Future network and other international groups to go through this network and connect with the global south, because there's thousands of us, there's hundreds of us, and we come from all over the world. So I think one is connecting, inviting, like you guys invited me today, like that's a huge step in bridging the gap, because how much will the global south discuss amongst themselves the consequences of the actions that are happening here today? It's about joining hands and bringing the conversation together. It's about working together. I don't want to deepen the gap between the global north and global south. I want it to come together. And I think that's what is the most important for me, because I know I have the support of the global south and I'm talking about a lot of these issues, but it's about getting that support from the global north. Because essentially, as a post-colonial country, I understand what it's like to have global north influences. I mean, I went to an international school. I did a British education system. Like, I have that understanding. I studied the same curriculum most of the global north studied. So what is the difference between them and I? It's just I'm here and they're there. Yeah.
Thanks. One last question from the chat. How is youth interconnected at COP?
So for the first time, we have a youth pavilion. I'm not directly involved in administering the pavilion, but I have a lot of activist friends who are, and I think that's a huge step in the right direction. And with Youngo and different youth organizations being given an opportunity to speak and actually being taken seriously, I think it's very important for us to be part of that conversation. And the more I see young people here, the more I see us being involved in the conversation. Yes, it was so hard for so many of us to be here, but we really come together as one. And I think that's what's really important.
Thank you so much. So we have 3 minutes left. Is there a message you want to say? Something?
So I would want to say is that I know the conference will end soon, and the momentum that the world is on right now, where all eyes are on the community here, I don't want that momentum to be lost, because a lot of people will go back to the comfort of their homes, but they should know, especially in the global north, but 33 million Pakistanis, which is not just a number, it's lives, it's children, it's women, it's indigenous communities, it's tribal communities, it is people who work on daily wages, who do not have the right to live a decent life or have food on their plate or a roof over their head. Those are the stakes. It is not about money, it is about those lives and those stories. And that cannot be forgotten. When we leave, if we fail, if we succeed, those people should not be forgotten by the global north.
Thank you very much for your interview. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you. Thank you.